All right, folks. Wow, this is really loud. I'm going to have to use my whisper indoor voice. We're going to get the meeting started, so we're going to keep it a little bit less formal than our normal board meetings, but if everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, I'd appreciate it.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank everybody that came out on this less than optimal night out there and take time out of your private lives to join us. What you see behind me is a list of areas that we want to focus on. We have some very big decisions to make this school year. We have a lot of questions that we want answered as a board and make a lot of major decisions. And the purpose of this meeting is to map out our process of what we're going to look at and how we're going to work our way through this. We wanted to have this meeting before we start getting inundated with like the enrollment projection study, which the board hasn't received yet. We're going to have a meeting next week on that, and we'll get that before the meeting, and the public will get it before the meeting. And we have lots of other areas we need to focus on. So we're here tonight to talk about each of the areas you see up here and work through what we think are the key decision points in each of those areas. Also, what underlying assumptions do we want to make sure we adhere to in each of those steps? You know, an example is, maintaining appropriate classroom size, as an example. We are going to take each of these one at a time and talk through it. And then I'm going to open it up to the community to share your opinions, your thoughts, and ask your questions. And then we'll move on to each of the individual topics one at a time. We aren't having the normal courtesy of the floor and all that. This is really to focus on these key topics. So when you share your questions or your opinions or some comments, I appreciate it if you keep it on the current topic and don't take it off onto another topic, and save that for the regular board meetings and the regular courtesy of the floor. Okay? Thank you. What's up first? So we have the enrollment projection study coming up. What's interesting, I think, is last year, there were meetings in this very room talking about enrollment projections, and the previous board thought it was in the best interest to go out and get a new study, and really left it up to the new board coming in, us, to work through that. We went through a vetting process of who to select, and we came to M&M. They're going to be delivering to us a very detailed document that will not only look at the trends in the overall school district's enrollment out the next few years, but also longer term, 5-10 years. And then they are going to be looking into the individual schools. As you folks know that have children in the various schools, they each have their own unique qualities, and that's also related to the unique enrollments that they have in them. So what we want to do is try to first come to agreement that we're confident in the numbers, that they're really the best that we can get, and then understand what the long-term impact of that is. For those of you who've tracked the historical enrollment, know that for some time our enrollment has been declining. One of the questions that's been put out there is, is that a trend that's going to happen long-term, or is that something that is going to change in the near future? So that's what the study is really going to help us decide. We have currently more than enough classroom for our current student body, and if you walk through all the buildings, you'll find some empty classrooms in pretty much all the buildings. So it begs the question, if the enrollment's going down and we have excess space, what does that mean for us? So the first place to start with that is really our enrollment projections. When we meet on the 1st, next Tuesday, to get the presentation and talk through that, I'm hoping a lot of people come and see that and listen attentively to it and ask some specific questions of that. For us, for the enrollment projections, I think what we need to do is really look at the long-term trend and see where it is. What they're going to be doing is providing several scenarios. So, depending on how you look at it, one is a very conservative scenario, one's going to be a very more aggressive, meaning things are going to change a bit, and then there's going to be the middle of the road. And we'll have to look at that and decide where we think those numbers are. I don't know if all those trends are going to show a downward trend, or some of them are going to show an upward trend or not, because I haven't seen that report yet. In terms of reviewing that and what we're going to do with that, I think we need to first focus on what is the total enrollment for the school district, to understand that, but then also dig into what are the individual schools going to look like. There's beliefs that I've heard from different people that certain elementary schools are going to be growing and others are going to be going down, and some beliefs that they're all going to continue to decline. So it'll be very interesting to see how those trends play out, and we're going to have to make decisions around that based on those trends. In terms of the board, does anybody have any concerns or kind of hot buttons related to the enrollments that they wanted to focus on?
I'll just, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
Sometimes we're all too polite. So one of the things that I think that we have actually working in our favor right here is, over the history of Methacton, we've had several different iterations of schools. So because of construction projects, because of the creation of Skyview, we've had different buildings closed and reopened and different alignments of classrooms and grades. So I guess one of the things that I would want us to look at that I haven't seen in any of our analysis so far is, when was the last time that we had 4 elementary schools open historically? I mean, I know a good bit of the history of Methacton, but not all of it, and not that well to know when we were at that point. But I think it would be worthwhile to look at what time period did we have 4 schools? What did the enrollment look like then? It obviously predated Skyview, so we would have to factor in having 5th grade at all of those elementary schools. But I think that might be a good jumping off point, because my concern is there's a black and white, but then there's a gray. There's a point where we absolutely need 5 schools. There's a point where we absolutely need 4. I'm worried about that in between, where we might need 4.5 schools, and that's just not a thing. So how do we make a decision if we end up in that middle zone that doesn't compromise class size and education, but doesn't leave us with space that's so underutilized and inefficient that it also becomes counterproductive to our educational goals? So that's, I think, information that would be useful to have to kind of help us frame our decisions here.
Yeah, from my perspective, the data is going to be the data, and we're all going to be able to take the data and move it in different ways. I do think it would be helpful to see the data that M&M is doing and also see the data that was in the previous study, just so we can make some comparatives from an analytics perspective. Not to say one was right or one was wrong, but you might end up doing some averaging out of that without digging through all of the previous records. It would be good to just kind of see that on a spreadsheet so that we could do it. I think Kim's right. The problem is going to be the gray area, and my guess is we will be in a gray area. And there could be discussions that say, okay, well, if we need more than a school and we look at the heavy investments, which is up on your topic in at least 2 of our schools, there might be a question of, is there a hybrid solution? Don't know. But I think it'll be important to nail the numbers and then kind of decide what boxes we put around the numbers. Obviously we'll probably have a redistricting discussion that's going to go along with all this. So I think initially it's going to make sense to just make sure we're all comfortable with the numbers, and then then we'll have to shift to where's the box that's going to go around these numbers of people, and what's the best way to configure the box, right? And it may not necessarily be the boxes that exist now. Maybe it'll be some other hybrid solution. So I just want to make sure we don't try to fit the numbers into a box prematurely.
Just a couple of quick. I think we want to validate the assumptions from the M&M that we requested, and the assumptions are what we. That the assumptions of what we asked for in the M&M study is what we got. So we want to at least verify that what the product we were delivered was based on what we asked for, so that we can move on from the perspective of needing another enrollment study. So it's just validating it. I guess the analogy to me is the second opinion. So I have some bump on my head, I go for a second opinion. I'm probably not going to spend the money on a third opinion if the guy says you have a bump on your head. So I think we need to sort of stop from the perspective of studies and accept these 2 as being close enough for our directional perspective.
Yeah, so I just want to say that I do agree with Scott. I think that a lot of this is going to be a comparison with the new numbers that we get and what we saw with Pell, trying to figure out some averages in there, figuring out the highs, the lows, the mids. In terms of our decision making, I think we're going to have to be comfortable with, are we making a decision for now? Are we making a decision for a 5-year down the road? Or are we making a decision based off of 10-year down the road? Because I think that if you looked at the Pell study, they showed enrollment dropping for the next 10 years, just a straight drop. So are we making a decision based off of that bottom line number, or are we making a decision on what's best for us now? I think that's very important, that we have to think of, if we're going to make a decision for next school year, it has to be the right decision for us now, not that, in 10 years, the enrollment may be this. And I think the other discussion that we have to make sure that we clarify is, when it comes to enrollment, is class size. Are we going to shoot for the class size target, or are we going to shoot for the class size maximum? So I think when it comes down to, this possible gray area where it really might be close with what we do, I think that we have to come to an agreement as a board that, are we shooting for the target, or are we shooting for the maximum? So, thank you.
I think it's valuable, as Kim was suggesting, to understand the history of how the schools have been open and closed in the district. And I know that my granddaughter went to Audubon when it reopened, so it had been closed for some period of time. But I think it's also important to know that education has changed dramatically from the standpoint of the research that has been done, the way schools should operate, and also the population of children that we face today. We have a much larger percentage of children with special needs than we did in the past. And so I think it's important to know exactly what our needs are at this moment, and perhaps a projection based on the students that we have and the direction that educational needs will happen in the future.
A couple other comments. You know, one of the things I've been saying right along is, in theory, we could have a declining enrollment, continuously declining, but an increase in capacity to the point of the special education. To kind of put it in simplistic terms, they require bigger square footage, right? More space for their support staff and whatever else they need. So, you know, we need to look at that carefully because it just continues to grow and grow and grow. So we need to be mindful of that. When we look at the numbers, and you know, a couple of people referenced the gray area. Where we're at today, I don't think anybody would argue that we have excess space in our school district. So when we see the numbers, you know, they could start long-term show some growth in the numbers. And I haven't seen them, so I don't know. But even if they show some modest growth, we need to really think about it from a capacity perspective, because we'd really need the enrollment to come back quite a little bit before we're really maxing out our existing space. So I just wanted to throw out there that we don't necessarily need a continuing declining trend in the data to say we have too much space and start trying to understand what we're going to do with our existing space. We could have a flat trend in the data. We could even have a modest uptake in the long-term trend of the data, and we're still going to have a decent amount of excess space. So we'll have to look at that and think through that. One other comment. You know, I was my first school board meeting I ever attended, I stood at the podium here and said the Pell study was not good. So that was about a year ago in this room. And based on the analysis that they presented, I couldn't really tell if their trend was wrong or not. I just didn't have a lot of faith in them doing the due diligence on the approach. And based on the room being full and a lot of people coming up and talking about that for a couple nights, you know, that, you know, kind of spurred the second study. But the point I'm trying to make is, even if there were some flaws in that study, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see polar opposite trends in the new study. It could be that they were, you know, stating a too rapid of a decline or something like that, but there might be some similarities between the new study and that study, or there might be some significant differences, and I just wanted to point that out to people. Okay. Does anybody have any comments or things they want to say related to the enrollment projections? Yeah, come on down, Andrew.
All right. Is that too loud? Okay. Andrew Sander, Lower Providence. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have said some things that I agree on. One of the biggest ones was the special needs, and I don't think, and I was part of the process of choosing a vendor, that the study is going to show a number of special needs students. Is it going to include that? Do you know?
We asked them to look into that.
You did?
So, yeah.
Okay, so you did do some, so hopefully they'll have some analysis
Yeah,
on
in
that.
terms of the visuals, I'm not sure what the visuals will look like, but
Okay. But as far as actual data, they're going to try
Yeah.
to give us a need for that. Okay, because
Yeah.
that's important. And one of the things that it does get stated a lot is that there is definitely excess capacity. I'm not sure if there's definitely excess capacity at elementary schools, or are you saying there's definitely excess capacity overall? Because I know there is overall, like in the high school, Skyview, et cetera.
overall there is, and if you go into the elementary schools, you'll see some classrooms that aren't being used at all. They're just closed down in some of
Okay.
those. So I think in almost every building, we do have some level of unused space.
Okay, so, and is that, we're going to talk about that in the next thing, right? The elementary capacity analysis? Okay, good. The only thing I would suggest is that we had the committee that was set up by the board and had said, hey, you guys could be on this committee, and we did work to select the vendor. But since that, it's been silent as far as having the committee involved. And I know there's a redistricting committee as well, so those two phases are still there. I would like to have more engagement with those committees. I was on one of the committees, but I think that it would be good for us to have more engagement with those committees.
My intent was to have you and John and the other people on that one committee preview the study and be able to ask questions of M&M prior to our public meeting, but because of timing, that hasn't happened. But we can certainly continue down that path, and as soon as we get the study and we can find time for you to talk directly with that committee, we can still definitely do that.
Because that concerns me, is we're talking about next Tuesday, Halloween is Monday. We all are very busy on weekends, so we're going to presumably maybe get the study tomorrow. We're saying beforehand, but the meeting's Tuesday. I don't really think we'd have enough time to look through that and vet it to be able to ask substantial questions on Tuesday evening. It's just a very tight timeline to be able to ask substantive questions. If they're going to come and do a presentation, I think you're going to have to allow the community and even yourselves time to absorb what they say and take initial questions, but then have another round with those folks, if it be through a committee or even through yourselves.
If the board or the community has a lot of follow-up questions, there's no reason we can't have some follow-up discussion with them.
Okay, because I just
Yeah.
wouldn't anticipate myself
Yeah.
personally being able to get through all that data.
Yeah.
When you think about PEL, how much time did you take to go through that data? You just said, you know, it
Yeah.
certainly wasn't a day.
Yeah. We just want to make sure everybody's comfortable with it in the end. So we have a timeline, and we have, meetings set in place. If we need to adjust anything, we'll adjust it, because we don't want to have people walking away feeling like they didn't fully vet that study or be able to ask the appropriate questions, whether it's the board or some form of community involvement as well.
Okay,
All right?
all right, great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Howard Jones, Lower Providence. One question I can answer. In the early 90s, there were 5 grade schools. They closed 2 of them, Audubon and Worcester. The student enrollment had been higher and dropped to like 3,100 students in and around that time. That's why they closed the schools. I can't tell you when they only had 4 open. So, as far as your study, it's kind of hard to have anything to say about it because I haven't seen it. But things that you need to be paying attention to, or at least from a utilization standpoint, and I think you've somewhat addressed it. A lot of the things that you get, and particularly the Pell study, looked at the school district like it was a jelly bean jar. You have so many things, you can jam so many things in it. That's not the way we use the schools, obviously, and a lot of Special ed has come on board since the 90s. We took a lot of it on ourselves because it was less expensive to do it that way than it was to let the IU do it. So I'm waiting with bated breath to see what this thing looks like. But from the standpoint of anybody expecting increased enrollment, that would be somewhat dubious because you're only going to get it from 3 places. New homes, which they're not building. Sale of existing homes that are going to replace people who don't have kids with people that do have kids. And the history on that isn't real good. Or you're going to have a wholesale replacement of non-public school people coming back to your schools. So it doesn't take much to have a downward trend. But we'll see what it looks like. Thank you.
Thanks. When I look out in the audience, I see a few people that have a long history with the school district, so appreciate you being here so you can share. And yeah, Jim.
Jim Malik, Jim Malik, Worcester. Did you guys look at this study we're talking about yet?
Are you asking if we've looked at it?
Yeah. Did you get it yet? Did you look at it?
I received a preliminary report, which was more about the high-level format. It didn't include all the analysis, and it wasn't based on the final numbers.
So-
In terms of the full report, no, I haven't seen it yet.
So you guys haven't seen this study that we're talking about yet that's going to be presented next Tuesday?
Correct. They're going to, M&M's coming in and presenting it next Tuesday.
Okay. The reason that we're here talking about this whole situation at all is because Skyview got built. That's why we're here. Skyview doesn't get built, we're not talking about this stuff. And according to the Act 34 hearing packet, there's an overcapacity problem, because if you look at the Act 34 packet, it said that the anticipated capacity was 7,500 seats, if you look at the Act 34 packet. Because I had it, because I was at the Act 34 hearing. And they anticipated the enrollment to be in 2020 of 6,300. That left 1,200 empty seats in 2020. Okay, so 6,300 was the enrollment they anticipated in 2020. Okay? Now, your enrollment today, because I got the figures, or the October enrollment, is 4,846. So if you do the math, you got 2,054 open seats, according to PD's or the Act 34 hearing packet. 2,000 empty seats is a lot of empty seats. That's a lot of overcapacity. That's your problem. Not your problem, that's your dilemma. That's your challenge, okay? So enrollment really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Your enrollment could be flat, it could go down, it could go up. You have 2,000 empty seats. Now, your enrollment's going to go down anyway because it has been. This study you're going to get is going to show, it's going to tell you it's going to go down. I've been to your website. 2006, 2007, your enrollment peaked at 54. I mean, you know, people can go to the website and tell you just as much as your experts. Your enrollment now is 4846. So you're down 600 on your enrollment. It's a straight line like this going down. Okay? Mr. Jones just told you about some of the reasons why your enrollment is going to go down. He forgot one key piece of the enrollment factor, which is birth rate. Probably one of the most important factors is the birth rate. Your birth rate peaked in 2010 at 385. 2011, it was 339. 2012, 306. 2013, 286. 2014, 278. Your birth rate went like this. Well, if your birth rate's going down, 5 years later, those students end up going to your school, so that your enrollment's going to go down. So what does that tell you? Your enrollment's going to go down. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that your enrollment is going to go down. So there's no suspense as to what your people are going to tell you when you go in there, when you get this report back. And there's nothing in the future that's going to make your birth rates go up. There's no factor that says your birth rates are going to go up in the future. Your birth rates are going to remain flat, which means your enrollment's going to remain flat or maybe go up mildly at the most. So all this talk about enrollment and what you're going to do about enrollment doesn't matter. You have 2,000 seats you're over capacity, and your enrollment's going nowhere. So this is kind of a waste of time, in my opinion. Okay? So that's number one. Number two is, which schools are you thinking about, or are you going to have to close? If you look at the most recent enrollment you guys put out.
Hey, Jim, can you save that part for later, because we're trying to stay focused on each topic.
On each topic, which one are we on, enrollment?
Yeah, we're on the
Okay.
enrollment.
Well, as far as the enrollment goes, I mean, I don't know how much we spent on the enrollment projections. I mean, I get your money back, because this is all from your website. This is from public websites.
I'd just like to make a comment, just Jim, Mr. Molick.
Yeah.
Dr. Molick. Sorry.
Yeah.
Something that happens time after time after time sometimes changes. And for you to say that enrollment has gone down, which it has, and I can go to the website too, it has gone down 6 consecutive years or whatever the number of years it is. What we want to know is, will that continue or not continue? And I don't think a trend is just the 6 previous data points. We're trying to get information from this study and verify a previous study that it will continue.
Wow.
So I would argue that it is not a waste of money, that we are trying to vet the process completely. As you know, there was a projection that, Mr. Jones said the enrollment was 3,100 in the 1990s, right? So there must have been a inflection point in both directions.
Well, the Peltz study was correct. The Peltz study was right. And we spent, I don't know how much money on the Peltz study. And it's going to be confirmed that it was correct. We just wasted a year of time, effort, and money to get a second study and delay the process. We wasted $1 million of taxpayer money delaying the process to get another study to confirm the Peltz study. Now, my question to you is, if this study comes back and confirms the findings in the Peltz study, are you going to do anything about it?
And that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Because we want to make a decision based on all the facts and all the inputs, and that's why we're trying to evaluate. It's not just, I would argue that the 6,300 capacity is a convenient number from a perspective of the argument, but I don't know if anybody walked around all the schools would identify that we have 2,100 open spots for students, unless we want to have class sizes of 40.
Well, I'm talking about, I went to the Department of Education and got the project voided based on faulty projections that I knew were wrong, okay?
That's fantastic. So we don't know that they're wrong. We weren't around in 1990 when there was a decision to make these things. So we're making decisions based on facts and trying to get independent viewpoints. So that's why we're here.
Right.
If you don't think it's worthwhile, that's fine. That's your opinion.
I'm not saying it's not worthwhile. What I'm saying is The Pelt study, I believe, was correct.
Okay.
The process that was gone through was politicized, in my opinion, politicized to delay this whole process. Now, we have another study that I believe is going to confirm what we found in the Pelt study. I'm saying let's get on with it and do what you got to do, and let's not waste another year, another $1 million. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Jim, thanks for sharing, doing your homework. But we are going through this process, to reiterate, to make a decision. Whether we keep all the schools or we reduce the schools, that's yet to be determined, but that's what we need to do. We also need to look at the imbalance at the elementary schools. Any decision we make that changes anything about it creates anxiety and stress. The other thing that creates anxiety and stress is not making a decision, so letting things roll on. So our goal is to come to a conclusion this year, and for the long-term benefit of the students and the school district and the community, and let's get moving on it, okay? Anybody else? John?
Good evening. John Andrews, Lower Providence. I think it's healthy that we have differences of opinion that are discussed, and it gives people a chance to reflect on various options. Trying to keep it just to enrollment projections and also include some enrollment facts. In the K-5 schools, the enrollment peaked out 13 years ago in 2003. And it's, with a few minor exceptions, since then, the trend in the elementaries has been a decline, and then that carries through, presuming that the population is reasonably static, it carries through to the point that if the minimum in let's say third grade is occurred last year, the minimum in 12th grade is going to occur 8 years in the future. And now this year, enrollment went up by 20 students in K-4 from last year. And I think that's significant. And that appears, in my analyses, to be due to what's happening in the single-family detached homes rather than in the apartments, where we have 1,000 or so apartments. Southeast Pennsylvania has gone through declines in a number of industry that employ people. And by analogy, in Nevada, when the gold mines went away, the people went away, and and you got ghost towns. For instance, in Philadelphia, I think in the last half of the last century, the manufacturing employment went down by like 250,000. But currently, Philadelphia is kind of a boom town. There's a lot of construction cranes. There's a lot of money being spent in the university area, in the hospitals. And for instance, locally at Shannondale, there's a rehabilitation center that just opened, that's open to the public, with about 300 jobs. The Visteon factory on Morris Road, which was closed for a lot of years, that was originally the biggest employer in the school district with 1,000 employees, now has 3 different businesses in there with probably 250 employees. And still lots of empty spaces in the parking lots. And one of the impediments to living in Lower Providence is a thing called the Bettswood Bridge. And if you've been through there recently, you can see there's a lot of progress on one of the 2 replacement bridges. You unclog that road, and people can get from Philadelphia to Route 202 and go to jobs in Chester County, or get in the traffic jam on the expressway, or they can wait and get on the rail extension into King of Prussia, which will have a large parking garage for people having jobs in Philadelphia. So I think that there's a resurgence in jobs in the area, and that will result in a resurgence in students in many school districts, not just Methacton. I think we've seen the bottom in enrollment in the elementary schools, and the only practical way to get it up, in my opinion, is through resales of existing homes. And I think that's going to happen. You can't take your home to the grave with you. You can't take your home to Florida with you in most cases, so you're going to sell your home, or it's going to be sold for you after your demise. And the people who buy homes in the suburbs are the young families with school students. And if we keep up our academics, those students will come to Methacton rather than to the other options for schools in the area. So those are my thoughts relative to enrollment projections. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Anybody else?
Suzanne Andrews, Lower Providence. When my husband came home and said that we're going to start another process and there were going to be these 2 meetings, and I said, this is where I came in. This was 10 years ago we started this sort of thing, the enrollment projections and so forth and so forth. And we're still wrestling with the same problems. I'm looking at these things that you want to look at tonight and wondering and puzzling over why we're spending so much time on the process when we haven't even seen or heard the report. And my understanding is that M&M is going to come and present, and then people will be allowed to make their opinions and so forth. And probably at that time you would talk about setting up committees or have input from the community and all those sorts of things. Isn't that what you were hoping to do? Everything is intertwined. There are a lot of questions, as you say. And one thing I don't see here, but I've heard about, it may be under educational programming, is all-day kindergarten as an option. And that would also be impacted by the capacity and all those sorts of things. So I guess I'm saying, is there some way this evening we could sort of cut to the chase and see, you have an idea in mind of how we were going to have a process, but could we get to that? How you would expect to address all of these things after we get the report? Because we're all feeling around talking about gray areas and so forth, and I think we would be better spending our time and having the community come once the report has been seen and digested, and then set up the process. So if you could just tell us what you expect to happen tonight in the way of setting up a process, please.
Sure. The idea behind tonight's meeting was to talk about the process overall before we started rolling up our sleeves and getting into enrollment data, capacity data, numbers around whether all-day kindergarten makes sense or not. Are we going to redistrict and look at data like that? So we wanted to talk through the process in the areas we're going to focus on ahead of time to put some thought into it, to get people's opinions about what to look for, what the concerns are, so that the discussion we just had about the enrollment projection, you know, people stated their concerns and areas they want us to look at. Then when we get into the M&M study and we're at that presentation and having follow-up discussions, we're a little bit more prepared.
Hi, Ashley Wilkerson from Audubon. I just have a quick question about a difference between the Pell study and the M&M study. Am I correct in remembering that there was no breakdown in terms of the geographic areas within the district from Pell for enrollment? Like, could we look at one area and say that it was a higher enrollment area than another, or was it the entire district overall? The reason I'm asking is because we're talking a lot about whether or not it was a waste of money to repeat the study, but my recollection was that the data from Pell was not data that we could use to redistrict whether or not we close a school or keep one open, because it didn't break it down to that level, but the re-enrollment study that we should be getting breaks it down so that we will absolutely be able to redistrict. Is that correct?
If I may, the Pell study was an aggregate report on the district enrollment and its projection over 10 years. The M&M study is designed to not only provide that information as well as provide by ascending area of each of the 5 elementary schools. So we'll have that breakdown.
So even if we had decided to close a school or redistrict after Pell, we would have needed further data to figure out how we were going to divide students among the elementary schools. Is that correct?
That's accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, if I would I just want to clear up the conversation about the report. In my report at the 9/20 work session of the board, I informed the board in order to keep the board and the public apprised of our process. That when we engaged Milone and McBroom, we requested that they provide a draft or preliminary report prior to the final report, which is planned for dissemination and then presentation on November 1st. While that report wasn't complete on 9/20, the draft report did reflect that the enrollment is likely to decline. And therefore, that then perpetuated my request to the board to consider moving forward with meetings such as this, as well as some additional consideration. So just to clear the air about, while the board hasn't seen or nor have I seen the complete report, there was a draft report provided to the administration, which and I'm just going to read from what I said. While the projections cannot be finalized until the individual schools' reports are official, the preliminary projections, which include scenarios forecasting a range of housing and economic conditions, indicate that stagnant or declining enrollment is likely to continue over the next 10 years. And I just want to make sure that, I think that speaks to some of the question that maybe Ms. Andrews had brought up.
All right, let's move on to the elementary school capacity. Does anybody want to start?
One thing I hear excess, and maybe I'm wrong. We certainly could be more efficient, but for example, I would imagine the people here whose children go to Audubon are thinking excess. There's no excess. And so we have to be careful when we keep using that word. I look at the capacity element from two sides. One is an educator, and I've lived this from a different end of it. I've lived it where the district I worked for was growing too much. So I've taught on a stage, I've taught in an LGI, I've taught in a storage facility, I've taught in the hallway. We were growing. Different story, I understand. So when I heard, and I believe it was Thompson, not Pell, talk about teaching pods, where teachers would go when their room is being utilized, I was like, hold on a second. Because he was referring to teaching pods, I felt, in a more secondary view. As a 6th grade teacher, former 3rd grade teacher, former itinerant gifted support teacher, K to 6, you are in that, being a classroom teacher, you can't go to a pod to make a parent phone call or to decompress. So when we look at capacity, I know we don't need the dream of all dreams of capacity, but you really need to look at it from an educator's point of view and a child's point of view, and like we all said, the special needs point of view. So when I keep hearing excess, that makes me nervous. The other side of this is our goal for capacity, or for any of this. What is our goal? Dr. Mullick brought up we've wasted $1 million in taxpayer money because we have this building open that needs a principal and needs a guidance counselor and needs all of that. But what is our goal here? Our goal here, I would imagine, is to educate our children the most efficiently as possible. That might mean reconfiguring buildings, redistricting, what have you. But if our goal here, and I know it is not, is to save money, I think we need to figure out the goal, and I think the goal is to do it efficiently. The other thing I'll say is, Ms. Hackett brought up a good point about education has changed. It has changed in so many ways that you might need a little more capacity in some areas and a little bit less capacity in others. But those changes are real, and the makeup of a classroom is real. And it goes down even to body size. Children are bigger. I know that sounds crazy, but it's not. So the capacity for me and the next one, education, the next three are kind of encompassing. And I think we need to keep our eye on the goal.
In terms of capacity, we have guidelines at each level, right? So at elementary school, we have the guidelines down there. And I think, I'm not sure. Have we been below that as an average, what our capacity is? I would guess if we have excess space, while at some schools it might be encroaching on whatever our max is, we have other schools where we're well below that. Is that true at the elementary school level? So if our classroom max is 22 kids, I imagine Audubon we're probably right there, and then other schools were a bit below that.
Yeah, at different schools, some sections of certain grades are at the max, which is in the elementary school, it would be 25, with grades K, 1, and 2 at the targeted level of 22. And there are some that, for example, there might be a first grade class, while it's targeted at 22, they could have 23, and depending on other factors, including siblings and other special circumstances, they could get up to 24. And then there are some sections that are down in 16, 17, 18. So So it does vary, and I can tell you that that's reflected on the monthly reports that we share as part of the Education Committee on enrollment.
And for 3 of the buildings, the newer buildings, you know, the footprint is more permanent than the other 2 buildings, because the other 2 buildings have the add-on trailers. Is that correct?
Well, the current Audubon and Arcola have what are called modulars.
The modulars.
And the Arrowhead building currently utilizes the modular spaces as, we'll call it homerooms and/or typical classroom spaces. Where in Audubon, it's currently the modular is used as either itinerant or reading specialist services.
And when M&M does the capacity study, they're doing it with and without the modulars?
Yeah, the direction that's been given to them is to make considerations with the understanding that we would either include or not include modulars in the determination.
So I think it's important as a board that we decide whether modulars are in the game or not in the game from a permanent basis. You know, they have a life cycle. If we decide they're in the permanent game, then we probably need to factor replacement thereof at some point in time, and some of them appear to be, you know, at that life cycle edge. And I think the determination is, if you need that capacity, do you redo modulars, or do you add bricks and mortar to the capacity? I don't know the answer to that. I think the other thing that would be helpful prior to or along with the M&M study is to make sure that the public is clearly aware, as well as the board, of what our capacity levels per grade are, so that, you know, it's very clearly stated, you know, K1, K2, et cetera, is X, you know, 3 and 4 is Y, so that everybody's working off the same assumptions as far as capacity maxes at the classroom that's preferred. I understand that occasionally we might get a bump of 1 or 2 here because of an influx or just a shift of the grade population in a particular geographic area, but I do think it would be helpful to have that, you know, documentation or that information readily available as kind of a fact sheet. And we probably ought to have kind of a fact sheet by school, you know, age, capacity, current number of grades in each one, just so that, you know, everybody's working off the same playbook versus everybody kind of giving their own interpretation of a playbook, because I think it's very important the board works off the same baseline to establish our analytics.
Does anybody have any concern about setting the guidance that if we're going to redistrict or we're going to reduce the number of buildings, let's just focus on getting rid of the modulars?
Yes, I do. Some of the modulars, you have to understand, there was a lot more of them than what there are out there now. And a lot of them were removed. We were paying rent on them. That was prior to Skyview. Skyview opened up. A lot of the modulars were taken away or relocated or whatever. In the case of Arrowhead, those modulars are there. They're actually integral parts of the building now. So you were actually say, okay, we're going to just chop them off because they're called modulars. So now we're going to spend money on, you know, upwards of $100,000 to remove them, retrofit the building, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, all that stuff. Okay. I'm not sure about the modulars at Audubon. Never been in them. I understand they're not in the greatest of shape. So there could be a case of looking at that. However, just to get rid of space because it's called something is, I think, foolish, unwise. Now, if you want to say, okay, well, let's not include that as classroom teaching space, okay, maybe look at it that way. Maybe use that space as a enrichment space or a special meeting place for special ed, someplace that would be, you know, more apt to be using as a smaller area, quiet, something like that. You know, but I mean, just to take it away because it's called a modular, I think is silly. Not to mention also adding expense to the school district money. We don't have to do that. Also, I believe in the facility studies, modulars were addressed. So that would be part of the plan. If they do need to be replaced, I'm sure they're going to be mentioned in there. I don't know. I didn't really pay attention to that. At this point, I can't recall. But I think, you know, I would not be in favor for that, saying that you would simply remove the modulars.
No, thanks for that history. It's good having all these people with history in the room.
And again, like I said, I don't think there's an ideal. You know, an example, because I think people need real-world educator examples, is the trend was, and this happened to me 5 years ago, they took away printers. We no longer have printers in our classroom. The first time it happened, we were all like, oh my, you know, we didn't know what we were going to do. We were freaking out. 5 years later, we're like, printers, who really cares? You know, we've got bigger things to worry about. That was a trend that happened in Methacton. At first, it was a big deal. I'm on the side of, I taught in Radnor. We had modulars. They were wonderful modulars. Was it ideal? Sometimes the kids had to put their coats on to go somewhere? No, but you know what? I agree that you can't always have the perfect. And I don't want to assume that we're closing a school or anything else, but in my mind, I'm thinking, if for some reason we went to 4 schools, whatever the decision is, I'm thinking to myself, yikes, there's that gray area. What do we do with that gray area without hurting education? And in my mind, I thought, where do we go to put on more modulars if brick and mortar is not a case? So I think modulars can be looked at as I'm not going to say a solution, but maybe not necessarily a negative. But we do have to consider that, yes, we have them.
Let's take it on a case-by-case basis then. So when you know, it seems like most likely we'll, at the bare minimum, have to redistrict. We need to confirm that, but at a bare minimum, we redistrict, and we'll look at the schools and, on a case-by-case basis, look at the modulars. And maybe they all stay, or maybe some of them go.
Just one more comment there. I think with the modulars, we have to look at when the end of the life cycle is. And then the decision is, like if we're at the end of a life cycle in, I'm going to make this up, in 3 years at Audubon for the ones that are there. They're just, you know, they've had it, they've been there, they have a life cycle. You can extend it by maintaining them well, et cetera. But once we get to that point where we're at a life cycle decision, we just have to decide as a district at that point, I think, whether we need to replace that capacity. You know, and then obviously it will be cheaper to replace the capacity with another modular versus bricks and mortar. But that I think has to be factored into the discussion and when we might be at capacity, or not at capacity, at life cycle for the asset.
Okay, that's a good point.
Sorry. I would agree with Urban, Scott. I think we have to include it, at least from the principle of a footprint, as being part of the roof's not falling in on those, but they're not ideal. But I think we need to include that in the equation as at least short-term availability of utilization. And 2 other things on the utilization is I think there's an opportunity for, especially I would think the elementary, is that if we do have these big classrooms being used for one-on-one instruction, there may be the possibility for some investment on those to break those into smaller pieces that could be the one classroom split into 4 for the one-on-one instruction, if that's what's needed or whatever is needed, but also the principle of scheduling and using those rooms. My guess is that some of those rooms are not, from a scheduling perspective, they may be used 3 hours out of 6, and they could be used 6 out of 6. So we could look at from the scheduling perspective. But I just wanted to make one other point around the math and make sure that we're all thinking, this is the thing that really gets a bug up with me was with the study of 25 times in every classroom when we know our parameters were for K to 2 were 22. So we know that the initial studies don't even add up from a mathematical perspective. So if we move on from that, we are a We don't even know what our class size is going to be on August 31st because we still have kids coming in and out at that late in the study. So you can end up with 92 kids in a particular class in a particular school, say Worcester, 92. We have a choice to make 4 classes of 23, or if I did my math right, 2 classes of 19 and 3 of 18. And so those are the type of decisions we can't just assume that everything breaks out evenly into buckets of 22 and 25, that we have to realize that if we are committed to these class sizes from a capacity perspective, when we're making these decisions, that we are going to have some variability, but the variability should be on both sides.
Yeah, I still think that in terms of capacity, one of the things that I think all of us need to see is what does our utilization and capacity in every school look like now? If you looked at the Thompson report, it did it for the high school, Skyview, and Arcola, but it didn't really do it for the elementary schools. Is there are X number of rooms in this building. So many are being used for a regular classroom. So many are being used for special needs. And just go down the line so that we know exactly what it looks like now. And then you do the then conversation. You know, if we close one school, what does the then look like? And I know the part of the opposition to this was you don't want to show a school's floor plan. Well, I don't think you really need to do it. You could do it in boxes, you could do it in blocks, you could just do it in a chart of total number of rooms. But I think it's really important for us to understand what it looks like now. And then, you know, if we close, you know, I go back to Audubon because it's the largest number of students. If you close a school with 454 students and redistrict, what are those other schools going to look like? And to Paul's point, for a classroom, you know, if you have 1 or 2 classrooms, full-size classrooms, maybe the idea is you could break it up. You could break up a full-size classroom and make it into 2, as long as that would work. And that's, again, when you have to bring in the teachers, the people on the ground who are there and will know, you know, what is the real amount of size that you need. I don't think that us as board members or sometimes even administrators can tell you, well, sure, they can make that work. I'd prefer to hear from the people on the ground. So I think that that's one thing that we really have to look at. And I think that that gets into, you know, Paul brought it up again, is the class size conversation. You know, we have to come to an agreement. I would prefer to stick to our targets. And if we're having a capacity report, which is always going towards the maximum, I think we're going to wind up apples and oranges here. So, thanks.
One other thing that I thought of, I'm not sure, and I don't believe that M&M went into every building, and maybe they didn't need to yet. But I thought that that's what was decided upon. And back to Mike's point, it's not that administrators are fibbing or sugarcoating the utilization, but there does need to be some real analysis there into the current use. You know, it was talk about computer labs not really being a thing of the past. And with the way Methacton uses technology, I can almost see that being true. There's so many computers in the classrooms and mobile carts. Maybe we really don't need a computer lab, but I would want to hear that. So I do think we really need, for sure, and it's not that we don't trust the administrator, it's just we haven't seen, and I think that's supposed to be part of the report, but I'm not positive.
Well, I think that it's important for the board to understand that, you know, our building administrators work regularly on an annual basis with the teachers and the staff within each building to best utilize the space. Is that and likely, if a redistricting were to occur, they would continue to do the same thing. To paint a picture and say that this is exactly how each building will look if a building is determined to be closed is really just an estimate, because until the actual students arrive, depending on the anticipation of the needs of those students, whether it's ESL services, reading services, special education services, a number of different things. The utilization of space will be something that the building principal and the work that they all have with their team will best suit that outcome. So while we can certainly make predictions, I can't paint you the exact picture of what it will look like until we determine a redistricting scenario and we know from history of the existing students that would likely go to that particular building and the needs based on but what we can't determine is who will be showing up that will come to us in kindergarten or will come to us outside of that predictable body of students. So while I'm not sure who's when we talk about things, I'm not certain who we're suggesting might give us a different opinion or a different way of accounting for the use of that space. But I can tell you our building principals are masters of that, and they will work with our teachers and other staff to best utilize that space.
In terms of redistricting or closing a building and moving them, this individual building administration will have the final say on what can go on in their school, right? So if a redistricting or capacity study based on 4 schools says Eagleville can absorb another 150 students, that's just a recommendation. The staff at Eagleville has to look at the building closely and either confirm that or give us an update, right?
I would agree that, our building administration, like in our previous conversations on this topic, we're intimately involved in the process. It's not something that, just runs by my desk. And so I just, want to make it clear that in the past and going forward, our administrators are the building leaders and are the leaders within our community that really set the stage for that engagement and the effective use of those buildings. And I personally think they've done an excellent job in the past, currently, and going forward. And I think that, while we're expecting some information from other experts in the determination of utilization of buildings in a more aggregate way, even though it's down to the buildings and sending areas, the utilization of the space will ultimately come down to the building principal and the work that they'll do with their team.
So,
go ahead.
I think that, to me, I think we need to invert our thinking on this. Capacity, to me, is not something that needs to be dictated by the facility itself. I think that way of thinking that's how you get, you have a box and it can fit so much and that's the size. To me, it's more about the policy. We can decide what the capacity is of our classrooms. We can say the capacity of that classroom is 18, even if it could fit 50 students. So I think that the capacity discussion really we have to decide as a board what capacity is. We have to decide what's the maximum number of students. I mean, we have policy that states this. We have to decide how much flexibility do we have with that policy? What is our comfort level in changing that policy? So we can't just assume that the building is what dictates what our capacity is, but I think that we have to remember that we have that ability ourselves to decide how many students we want in a classroom and then figure out the best way to make that happen given the facilities that we have.
Okay, thank you. I hope other people are taking good notes. I apologize, I'm under the weather and I'm shaken to the point where I can't take notes anymore. I can't read my own writing, so hopefully others up here are taking good notes. I agree with your point to a certain extent. If we go back to my Eagleville example and we're talking about 150 students, the answer, I would imagine, would be very different from the administration in Eagleville if that 150 included 100 special needs kids, to make up an example, versus 150 students that don't need any extra services. So I think that's part of the process that we're going to rely on the the schools to make. Also, the example I use, and it's a silly example, but it proves the point, is, when we look at redistricting and moving the kids around, the math might work out, but we don't want to end up with a elementary school of all boys. They would like it, but all of our staff would quit. But, things like that, you got to balance out on a lot of different dimensions. Okay, anybody else? Anybody out there want? Oh, look. Somebody who hasn't spoken yet, we'll let you go first. Just so you know, since this isn't a normal meeting, we aren't adhering to the 3 minutes, but, after 5 minutes or so, I'll be asking people to wrap up their comments so we can move along. Thank you.
And sorry, feel free to form a line behind so that you...
Some sit down.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I won't take more than a couple minutes. So one of the things it's more of a comment. I really appreciate all the discussion, everything that's happening tonight. I think one of the things that didn't happen when we first got the presentation, I guess a year and a half ago, was really, like you said, Dr. Zerbe, painting the picture. What do we want our elementary schools to look like? We want to make sure we abide by a certain level of class size. We want to make sure we account for special ed. All the things you actually said tonight are great. It's just, when we originally got the message, you pretty much said, well, we got the enrollment and capacity study from the vendor, so that means we can close the school, and oh, by the way, we're going to do it in 3 months. So, anybody that has a kindergartner starting or anything like that, well, you'll just have to figure it out. And we're not going to let you know what school they're going to. So if you come to the community and paint the picture and pretty much say, it looks like everybody sitting around that table really cares about doing what's best for the district as a whole. If you do that, paint a picture that says, we want the education of all of our students, including elementary school, to be the best it can be. I think people are really going to gravitate toward what you're trying to do. We in Audubon, we want you to redistrict. We have too many students. Kids have to eat lunch at 11. They're crowded in the hallways, all that. So, I think you'll get a lot of support there. But if you do paint that picture of we want to really improve things and, map what you want from the board and the administration with what you're getting from your vendor, you're going to get a lot of more support. Thank you very much for all that you're doing and also all the time you're putting in. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
How you doing? Frank Eels. Lower Providence Audubon. I heard what was said by I don't know anyone's name over here, sorry, but the two folks over here, and I really liked it, that we need to be open, we need to be transparent, we need to explain. I have one son who had special education, other one who doesn't. When I came 18 months or so ago, I came with an open mind. I said, you know what, let's hear what they got to say. And I thought basically everyone was just, it was, this is what we're doing, we don't need to tell you why, but we got to dot this I and cross this T. I do public meetings for PennDOT. You have to be transparent. Now you have to remember that in 2006, 2007, everyone convinced us that there's all these extra students coming, so we have to build the school next door. I know no one here did that, but you have to remember this is our mindset. Then last year, people walked in and said, oh, wait, we were wrong. Now there's no students. Now we got to close the school. You have to remember these things have changed. They've gone back and forth. You have to be transparent. I thought what you folks said was excellent. You should lay it out, explain everything, explain why you're making the decision. Decision has to be made. I feel bad for you folks, but a decision has to be made. But you have to be transparent. Thank you.
Great. Andrew Sander. Once again, John and I actually have talked about this a lot, the capacity, and I could probably talk for 2 hours on it. But I think the biggest thing was one of the things Mr. Dorn had asked for, and I think you do need to have a building by building, grade by grade. And that's something that was promised a long time ago in the original hearings. Hey, if you guys really want something building by building, room by room, what is the capacity for the children based on each grade? So again, I'm putting my hat out there. I would love to work on that with you guys, and I think it's important that while we say the administrators of the buildings, I think there was a lot of talk about maybe having teachers involved. Administrators are supposed to say, yes, we can do it. That's their job. All right, so I commend them for it, because I want, if we have a budget cut or we have something, I want those guys to say, we're going to do it with it. But I don't want them, I don't think we're in the situation where we have to close the school if we don't need to capacity-wise. You know, it's not like we're going to go out of business because we don't close the school. So I don't want them to say, well, we can do it because we have to. So if you let the teachers get involved, you'll get a little bit more of an honest answer, I think. And just a couple of other things I think, you know, think that you guys as a board really should try to visit the schools, each of the schools. And, well, and you may have, but if you don't know what the modulars look like at Arrowhead, or you don't know what the modular looks like at Audubon, maybe take a little more time as you're going through it. And I know from my time in Eagleville, Audubon, and Arrowhead, there is not a lot of Exeter capacity. There really isn't. There are some rooms, but it's nowhere near tumbleweeds going down the hallways. Now, I haven't been in Eagleville and I haven't been in Woodland, so.
That was one thing Dr. Zerbe did nice. You know, when we came on board, we had 6 new board members, so that was a big change.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things he did for us as soon as we started is set up meetings to go through all the schools. I don't think, Herb, you were there. It was really more for the new board members. But we walked through all the schools and the modulars and everything. So we did see it with the kids in it, got to say hi to some of the kids I knew, and that was kind of nice.
But it does, because there's a lot of talk, even with, you know, there's so much extra capacity. Now, from what I understand from people, there's tons of capacity in the high school. There's plenty of capacity in Arcola, some in Skyview, but not as much in the other schools. So I also don't want that to get lost. And, you know, Mr. Mullock made the comments of how many seats there are. Well, where are those seats? Are they in the schools that we're targeting closing, or are they in schools that aren't targeted for closing? Because you can't close a high school. I just want to keep that in mind.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Ferrara. I live in Eagleville. I have a wonderful little daughter named Margot who goes to 2nd grade at the school, and another daughter named Lulu who's going to be arriving in kindergarten in 2 years. And I wanted to make a suggestion for the manner of framing the debate when we get to the point that we are starting to have public discussions about what we're going to do and making a decision. And I want to suggest, based on the experience that I had with going through Pell and all that, that a capacity study is a very complicated thing, and it involves very complex algorithms and data sets and methodologies, and debating the ins and outs of those things in a public discussion, in my experience, has not been especially productive and is more than a little bit boring. And fundamentally, I don't think that that's where the discussion should really be. I would much rather see a discussion that boils us down to fundamentally what this decision comes down to, and I think it's actually rather simple. And I would urge you to consider, so we're talking about a decision between 2 outcomes, one where we have 4 schools, one where we have 5 schools. And I think it's great to boil it down to a discussion of those hypothetical scenarios. There are all kinds of ways that we can tweak the parameters of either one of those decisions, but fundamentally that's what we're talking about, 4 versus 5. Right? And I think that there are fundamentally 2 points that discussion turns on, and 2 things that people value that constitute a trade-off between one another. On the one hand, we have cost. Right? People want to be able to keep costs low, and my understanding from the previous discussion had been that the reason why this is coming up at all is because the district is facing a budget shortfall, that we have a deficit that was impending upon us for various different reasons. So one of the things I'd like to see in scenario A versus scenario B is a top-line metric, and I think this would be really simple, top-line metric of what our expected projected budget deficit or surplus would be in coming years, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, under scenario A versus under scenario B. In a sense, we're making a decision about what we want to buy, right? And we should be looking at what the costs are under those 2 scenarios. Second point is student-to-teacher ratio. And I think that's a very comprehensible metric and fundamentally the most proximate thing that we're actually tweaking when we're making that trade-off. And that also would probably have to be explained in terms of what are we going to do for kindergarten through first and then second through fifth. And there's also probably a metric of risk that comes in with that, because when we're closing a whole school, we're left with less wiggle room. So we're talking about ranges in terms of what that's going to be if we were to close one of the schools, right? And so that sounds to me like a discussion of here's what our expected student-to-teacher ratios are going to be, or the ranges in which they are expected to fall as soon as we close the school and migrate everybody over to the new environment. Again, there's tons of parameters that you can tweak along that, but boil it down to one assumption, express it as ranges if you need to. And if you do this right, you can frame up the discussion as a decision between how much we want to pay and how much educational benefit we want to have, based on metrics of what the expected budget surplus or shortfall is going to be, versus what the expected student-teacher ratio is going to be. And I think you could do that whole thing in a single slide. And I think that would be a great way to frame up the discussion, rather than starting it out with the ins and outs of the enrollment projections and the methodology and so forth. That invites a very different kind of discussion that I think basically goes nowhere. So I want to suggest that we frame up the discussion initially as a decision between scenario A, scenario B, based on how much we're paying versus what kind of educational quality we're getting. And for me, final point, if I were to make a decision, I would always be looking to bias the student-to-teacher ratio. That's something that I have a strong interest in. And so seeing that spelled out for me top line is going to be really valuable in terms of helping me support which decision is actually going to be made. Understanding its effects in concrete quantitative terms is going to be really, really helpful to me, and I'd love to see that. And the reason why I would suggest biasing that for the board as well is because the fundamental educational mission of a school board and of a school district is to ensure the educational quality for the students, to ensure that they get the best outcome they can from the educational experience afforded them. And let's not forget that that is the fundamental value that the school district should have.
Thank you. I'm okay. We have a doctor in the house if I get worse. I feel comfortable that Jim's here. Just a couple comments. You know, the idea about capacity, you know, and there's extra capacity right now. When we go through this exercise, if we reduce the schools or we're redistricting schools or both, we're still going to be looking at capacity, because what we don't want to do is fill up the buildings to 100%. So we need to have a buffer in there that is acceptable to us and makes sense. And that student-teacher ratio is proven out time and time again to be an important metric in terms of overall education. So that's a good suggestion, and let's incorporate that.
John Andrews. The Pell study had a skewed view of capacity. It had two choices, either 22 per classroom or 25. And we have a policy currently that for grades kindergarten and grade 1, we have a maximum of 22, and for the higher grades, a maximum of 25. Now, for this current school year, the largest mean enrollment in a classroom is in kindergarten. It's not in grades 2, 3, or 4. Mr. Thompson, in one of the Pell reports, was indicating that, we'd have 25 to a classroom, and then we'd have 5 floater rooms to use for variations in enrollment over the years, and that didn't make a lot of sense to me. And in looking at data from a wide variety of school districts, I find that typically, Methacton is similar to those in that they have maximum class sizes of 25, but they assume that in terms of placing the students, that they have actual utilizations of 85 to 90%. For instance, this year, among the 51 schoolrooms that we utilize for grades 2, 3, and 4, none of them have more than 24 students in as of October 1. And you need a little flexibility there because you can have students moving in November or March or whatever, and you want to accommodate them in a fair way. So you can have a capacity of 25 in a schoolroom, but understand that you're unlikely to get 25 in very many of them. So the utilization, the only way you get to 100% utilization is to use the storerooms and the stages and the corridors in some way. And the other thing is that currently there are 45 classrooms in the 5 elementaries utilized for special education.
Excuse me for a second.
Yes.
John, I have to disagree with you. Since this is an open forum and we are doing this as a roundtable, I'm going to disagree with you on that last point. Using the storage closets to make it 100%. No. I had a child in Worcester that went through that. And it's not happening again to any other kids in this school district. No way will I have any kids meeting with a special education teacher in a closet. As long as I'm on this board, that will never happen. I will fight for that, and you cannot say that's 100%. 100% is when you have every classroom filled to the capacity that we say, 22, 25, whatever we decide it to be. That's 100%. Not when you're saying every class stage, no. And so let's keep it real, let's keep it, I'm not going to sit here and listen to this all the time. I went through this for months and months and months before. Because if we're going to go do this, then we can't have these meetings. Because it's not right. Let's keep it real. Let's keep it accurate. That's what everybody on this board wants. We want accurate data. We want accurate facts. We want to hear truth, not conjecture, not extrapolation through the roof. Okay? Because if that's what we're going to do...
Yeah, I would like to echo what Herb's saying. He shared his opinion. I think I can speak on behalf of everybody on the board on this. I don't usually speak on behalf of everybody, but, you know, we want to do the right thing. We aren't going to do things that are going to harm our children's education. You know, the example of the closet, or changing class sizes to 35 kids. We just aren't going to do that. I'd rather we figure out a way to get the budget to keep all the schools open and fixed up, as opposed to, you know, harming our children's educational experience. So,
well, so there are 45 rooms used for special education pullouts, and you know, so if it's a pullout, it's not for the full day typically, and we, the public, don't know the facts on is it a pullout for an hour or 3 hours? How many students are educated with the special education teachers? But along with those 45 rooms, there are about 50 special education teachers in the elementaries. Now, if you were to close Audubon, and currently the regular classrooms in the K-4s are at 84% of capacity. Now, if you were to close Audubon, your number of regular rooms would go to 58 with a capacity of 115%, and the number of pull-out rooms would go from 45 to 29. So, you know, there's a few problems there, you would agree. So I think that there's the capacity and the utilization of regular rooms, and then there's the capacity and the utilization of the special ed rooms. For instance, autistic classes are limited to 8 students by PDE regulation. for dyslexic students, I don't know the number. There's a whole slew of instances of special accommodations for the difficulties that the education system is trying to overcome. So the other thing relative to capacity is that at Skyview and Arcola, the capacity numbers are much lower, and there are optional ways to educate K through 8 that could better utilize the rooms in, let's say, in Skyview. Maybe you have some fourth graders in Skyview. There's lots of options there, but currently we're arbitrarily restricted to either closing Audubon or closing Arrowhead or closing both of them. And I think that closing Audubon seems impossible to me. And so...
Can you finish up, John?
Yes. I'm leery at this point of how the Malone and McBroom study addresses capacity of the special education rooms.
Thank you.
Good evening. Sandy Fisher, kindergarten teacher at Arrowhead Elementary. I have a long history with the district. I came, as a student, came through K to 12. I love Methacton, and I went into teaching to advocate for children. I feel that we, or you as a board, or I would like to ask you as a board, to reconsider your ratio of elementary students to teachers. If you walk into my kindergarten classroom right now, I have 22 students to 1 at the beginning of the year in September with 5- and 6-year-olds. It's a lot of kids. It's a lot of kids that some have not been in school, some have special needs, some are still identifying needs. I would love you to reconsider your elementary numbers from 22, maybe down to 18 or 19 as your cap. That being said, the question was, looking into full-day kindergarten, does it make sense? I know, as a kindergarten teacher, and speaking on behalf of the other kindergarten teachers in the district, we would love to sit down and have a conversation with you to let you know our professional opinion on it, as well as be an active role in your decision-making. So we invite you to have that meeting. I would also invite you into my classroom any day to see what a day in kindergarten is like in a half-day program, with having full-day curriculum to teach a full-day ELA curriculum and a full-day math curriculum in a half a day, and still have our children be successful that we want. And that's, as a teacher and as an advocate for the kids, that's what I want. I want my kids to be successful. So thank you.
We all do, and thank you for offering that up. Just to note, I did enter a kindergarten class last spring, and I ended up with a 5-foot snake inside my shirt, so you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen.
Hi, I'm Dawn Monterre. I'm the librarian at Audubon and at Arrowhead. You asked about the history of the district. Well, I think other than Mr. Andrews, I probably have been here longer than most people. I started in the district in 1988 as a classroom teacher at Eagleville, the old Eagleville. I can tell you what it's like to have a building beyond capacity. We were K to 5. We had 4 or 5 of every grade. We did have people teaching in the classroom, in the hallways, in the closet. We had to start lunch 10:30 in the morning to get everybody through. We couldn't fit the entire school in the auditorium for an assembly because we were that big. I see the same things happening at Audubon. You say that there are rooms that are available. Well, there aren't any rooms at Audubon. I don't know where you found those rooms. Just this week, we had classroom teachers testing students, both in the closet in my library, in the art closet in the hallway, to do their Fontes and Pinnell testing. My concern is that if you close a school, you're going to take us back to those days where we were really overcrowded and we won't have any wiggle room, as you said. I also wanted to give a shout out for Audubon. Every day in my library, I look at a painting that's on the wall. It shows 4 little schoolhouses for the last 200 years that have been in Audubon. And I would hate for there not to be a school with the name of Audubon. I'd just like to say that please keep Audubon open. I think it's a great school. We love our school. And that's what the town's named for. But thank you.
Thank you. Ashley?
Hi. Ashley Wilkerson from Audubon. I guess the first thing I'd like to say is that since there are so many things that are in flux, we could use this as an opportunity to really look at evidence-based education, and it's something that everyone has touched on, but I think it would be a great way to really establish what our classroom sizes are and explain it to the public in a way that it's palatable no matter what we decide. If we look at the evidence and can show the public that studies show just arbitrarily that 18 is the best size for a kindergarten class and that we can come close to that, maybe 19 is where we have to set it, but explain why we're setting it there and how we came to that decision, people are going to be more accepting of our class limits. I can tell you this is the, third year that my daughter has had 24 kids in her class. She's in 3rd grade now. I had the opportunity to come in during Career Day last year, and I'd planned to do 2 activities with that class because it seemed like a reasonable amount of time. We were only able to do 1 because with that number of kids and myself and the teacher and kids with varying abilities, there simply was not enough time to do everything that was planned. And I look at that and extrapolate that to what my daughter's teacher goes through every day with a class that size, and can imagine how many opportunities those kids may be missing out on, especially when we know that most kids have different learning styles, and what works for one kid isn't necessarily going to work for the child sitting next to them. The second thing I would say is whatever we do, plan for the bubble class. My son is in one of those. He's at Arcola this year. They're eating lunch at 10:40 in some of those classes because there are so many kids. It's the only way to structure it. So no matter what we do, even if it looks perfect, plan for what happens when, for example, you're like Audubon this year and we have 5 second-grade classrooms. Will we be able to handle that? Not if, but when it comes through, because it's going to happen. And the last thing that I would say is, just as important as making the right decision is getting the public on board with it. And I think we saw that very clearly over the last year or 2. My suggestion would be, and I think that's been touched on already, but literally a chart, and I'll hand this to you in a minute. Every block is a classroom at a school. In that block gets written what grade it is, how many students are in that classroom, and how many teachers and aides. And I know that we're not going to have exact numbers, but ballpark numbers, because that's going to help all the parents look at the school and say, is this something that's going to work? Oh yeah, you know what, that actually looks okay. The other thing that I would suggest, and I'm going to touch on another topic, but just because it flows with my point, for the parents of kids who have special needs, who get special education services, there's a separate concern about that space. So have a sheet that addresses every possible service. For example, speech. Is there a dedicated classroom? And if there's not, will there be multiple services simultaneously in a classroom with speech? Same thing for OT, for PT, for emotional support, counseling services, for the music room, music lessons, art room, band, orchestra space, autistic support class, communication class, math support, reading support, gifted support, K-2 learning support, 3 and 4 learning support. It's a lot of different specialties. All of those parents are going to want to know that their kids are going to be okay. And if that information is put out there in an easy-to-understand graphic, you're going to have buy-in from parents. It's not going to be perfect. There's no way we're going to get what's perfect, but if we can get something good and people can see it and get their minds around it, you'll have the support of the community.
Thanks, Ashley. Give it to somebody else. I'm not going to touch it.
Jim Malik again. You'd be surprised to know that class size really isn't the most important factor in learning. The single most important factor in learning is the parent. Parent is the single studies show that the parent is the single most important factor in learning. And we have some great parents at Methacton. Great parents sitting up front. And, you know, having a great parent working with a teacher is a team that, you know, you just can't beat. We wouldn't be sitting here right now if the old board had looked at entertaining, expanding each of the elementary schools. They wouldn't entertain expanding each of the elementary schools to increase the capacity. They wouldn't even entertain it. Now, I don't know why, but that was off the table from day one. So now we're left with Skyview and all of that overcapacity, because most of it is at Skyview and the high school and Arcola, leaving the other elementary schools with modulars that we talked about. So there's your problem. And as has been stated, Audubon is under capacity. Audubon has most of the enrollment. I think they're close to 500 students. I think the new enrollment is like 465. It's big. And if you look at all the other elementary schools, they're in the 300 range. So, you know, when it comes down to what you guys need to do, I mean, Audubon's got a problem. They've got no capacity. So when you look at, you know, where you guys have to make your decision, Audubon is a situation where, I mean, you got to look at redistricting there and possibly closing that school because they don't have any capacity. There's nothing, there's nowhere you can put the students. So I think it's pretty cut and dry about, you know, where you need to look, because I don't think you're going to add modulars to deal with the capacity issue at Audubon. Doesn't make any sense. So you have really two options. You either redistrict the students from Audubon, and where do you redistrict them? Do you put them at the other elementary schools, which may be tight? Do you put them up at Skyview? Or do you go ahead and close the school? I mean, that's basically where your options are. Ms. Reese had mentioned something about the $1 million I was talking about. You know, it's not about money here at this point. You know, I'm not talking about dollars and cents just to save money. If you guys don't act and do something, what's going to happen is you're not going to make referendum. Okay? That's what's going to happen, because you're going to have a shortfall. You're not going to make referendum. And who's going to get hurt? Not me. I'm not going to get hurt. The kids are going to get hurt. Because when you don't make referendum, you're going to have to make cuts in the kids' programs, because your debt service is your debt service. You can't change that. You can't change the salaries and benefits. So the only place to cut are the kids' programs. There's your problem. So when I say you wasted $1 million, that's $1 million you could be using for the kids and the kids' programs. So that's my point. I'm not saying you save $1 million to put back in it, you know. Basically, you're going to come to a situation, if you don't act soon, another $1 million is going to go by the wayside, because when you redistrict and you do a closure, if you're going to do that, you're probably going to save $1 million that you can then put back into programmatic issues. That's the point. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Good point. Anybody else on this topic? Oh, sorry, Candy, I didn't see you.
Candy Oliver, Eagleville. I only have one question. We had a previous town hall meeting with a previous board to discuss enrollment, capacity, and school closures, and they were publicly vilified for suggesting to close the school. Tonight we're having a town hall meeting to discuss enrollment, and capacity and school closures. What's the difference? Difference people sitting at the table? Because we're
No.
still dealing with the same
Candy,
issue.
it was not a town hall meeting previously. They were public hearings, and it was a different process.
It was a special meeting. It was a meeting called Discuss School Closures. They were vilified for suggesting to close the school. I stood here and agreed with him, and I was called everything possible from the audience. Tonight, we're sitting in the same room, talking about the same things. What's the difference? Just different faces at the table? Because clearly, things haven't changed. They've gotten a little worse for some of us who've been paying attention for a long time. Now, I don't know, me personally, I think I'm owed an apology because I thought we should close the school. I think the previous board members are owed an apology because you're discussing the same things they did. So, I mean, only the room's not full tonight, which is surprising, and I understand why, but you're having a meeting with no enrollment numbers out there yet. I'm curious to see what the enrollment is, since you've spent more money to get another enrollment study. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on, but in the year or so since the last meeting, we've seen enrollment decline. Now, you're talking about keeping schools open. You need to also talk about how much it's going to cost the taxpayers to fix up these buildings and explain why Skyview needs to be repaired. Skyview is 6 years old. And if there's problems with Skyview, you people need to find the contractors and look at the guarantees they gave and hold them to it, because that is the newest building in the school district. And from what I understand, the roof is leaking. I think roofs get guarantees, at least on private homes they do. The roof is leaking, you need to find a contractor. I mean, I still have the name of the general construction manager, but I don't think that would do you any good. But you should be able to find out why that roof's leaking after 6 years. So, hopefully I'll be here next week for your enrollment study.
Good, thank you.
Hi, Joe Werson. I just wanted to address what I think the difference is. The difference to me is that I have a school board now that I truly believe has the best interest of the children at heart and who are doing their best to be transparent. And I think that's why that you're going to see success with whatever decision you make. Thanks.
Thank you. Educational program. Do you have any comments on it? Or have
Is
we
that
covered?
AKA full-day kindergarten? Or is
Well,
that AKA everything?
Well,
Okay.
yeah, we've touched on a lot of things already related to that, so.
And I will just say, the Education Committee thought this was the time to discuss full-day kindergarten. There's a lot to discuss, and of course, the teachers brought up discussing it with the teachers. There's capacity to discuss, there's a budget to discuss, but it's definitively worth looking into, and for me, it's two big reasons. One, our strategic plan talks about the whole child, and two, kindergarten is no longer kindergarten when you squeeze it into 2.5 hours. It used to be able to be done in 2.5 hours, and that is why a majority of this state has gone to full day. We can't say we can do it tomorrow, but it's got to be part of the picture. That's it.
Yeah, I just had a quick question in terms of the timeline. I know Dr. Katona was working on, a follow-up with a presentation. Where will that fall out in terms of, our timeline moving forward? Do we have any update on when we might hear the results of that?
I think her intent is to bring some information forward to the Education Committee this month. The intent overall was to make sure that whatever information the board needed in order to use that as part of any decisions that may need to be made in conjunction with the items that are listed up here on the screen, as well as others.
Anybody else?
I think it goes without saying that none of us wants to see dramatic changes in the educational programming in our district unless it means that the schools are going to get better. I mean, I think we don't want to do anything to compromise the educational programming at this point in the game. Again, to me, this goes back to class size, it goes back to policy, and I feel like while we are looking at redistricting, while we are looking at changing the alignment of these schools and who is going to go where, I think now is the ideal time to revisit our policy on class size and to revisit what we believe is, educationally speaking, the ideal class size, and what would it take for us to get to that number or to get close to it, and how we can make that happen, given the fact that we have the room. I mean, other districts don't have the luxury of space that we do right now to put a positive spin on our excess capacity. And obviously, having 18 students to a class would be wonderful, but it may not be the most cost-effective way to run a school. So maybe having a conversation about how we want classes to look and seeing what it would take to make that happen.
I mean, it's just my opinion, but we're either going to do full-day kindergarten now, or we aren't going to do it in the near future, because we're in there working on all the schools together, and any change creates anxiety and all that. So, definitely we should consider that. Related to that, whether it's the size of the kindergartens or the elementary, do we have good benchmarks about what the rest of the county looks like and the state looks like?
In regards to class size?
Class size and how to structure full-day kindergarten and all that.
I know Dr. Catona is including that information as part of the...
Okay.
She actually included that as part of the original report and the recommendation to start looking at a deeper discussion of it.
In Dr. Catona's report, will the costs for full-day kindergarten be covered?
Yes.
Full costs? Staffing, busing, building, everything? Not just curriculum costs?
Well, primarily, in order to, the direction that I've given her in terms of costs, it primarily will include staffing and the materials associated with it. Mm-hmm. Now, the cost associated with transportation certainly would likely be a reduction to help offset the cost, because there's less. We would likely eliminate the midday run. Mm-hmm. That's if the recommendation is to, have all students participate in full-day kindergarten. In some districts, as Dr. Catona discussed, even though I think it's not the preference of the Education Committee, but there are other iterations of and configurations of how full-day kindergarten gets implemented, with some half, some full. But I believe the Education Committee's direction to her to come back with a full-day program, and will include all those things that are pertinent.
Okay, because it seems to me there's so many other venues or avenues that full-day kindergarten is being done now. I know I would like to see some type of plan on how they would introduce full-day kindergarten into the district, whether it be a phase-in program, enrollment caps or whatever, because I just don't know. I don't know how you can logically formulate a cost on something that is so unknown. You have a lot of private kindergarten systems out there, private schools that offer full-day kindergarten, and they might get a lot of people moving from that into the district. And as usual, I do have a strong concern on cost with the district's ability to afford to pay for it. And as Chris pointed out, now is the opportune time to look at this, because you are looking at your buildings and your classroom structures, sizes, capacities, and all that. So to me, we first continue on where the work started, finding out our true capacities, our enrollment projections, our capacities, and find out where we are with that. Then if you decide, then say, okay, the next step is to look at, okay, what impact will full-day kindergarten have on this, with either a phase-in, with a cap system or something like that, I don't know. I'm not an educator, so I don't know how that would work. But do you see where I'm going with this? Because if it turns out then that full-day kindergarten is what then takes your enrollment in the opposite direction, then everything you have from Pell, everything you have from M&M is out the window.
M&M is, in their analysis, looking with and without full-day kindergarten, correct?
As part of the, as part of the redistricting scenarios.
To Herb's point, though, if Dr. Katona or somebody else can identify some local school districts that recently did that and talk to the pluses and minuses about that, they can probably share with, they saw a 15% increase from kids coming back from private kindergarten, some things like that, to put some more definitive numbers around everything.
Yeah, the direction that I've given her is once we receive the enrollment report and the numbers associated with those elementary serving areas, she can then use those numbers as part of the determination of what the likely staffing would be. And that's typically the bulk of what you would need in terms of the costs associated with that type of a program. But there's certainly other ancillary costs, and while we can make an estimate on some of those things, primarily our issue with implementing full-day kindergarten are the text and the staffing associated.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that we are addressing capacity at this point, but I don't think that whether or not we consider full-day kindergarten should be based on capacity. I think it should be the other way around, because I think full-day kindergarten needs its own study to determine what the value of it is to the district, independent of what our current capacity is.
I think that if I could just suggest that the reason why I believe this was brought forward was to make certain that whatever decision that is before us, potentially in December or January, that we don't make that decision and then regret making that decision without considering the potential need. So for example, while the purpose of whether we should have full-day kindergarten or not is, I agree with you, Ms. Hackett, that may be a different study, but we shouldn't consider capacity in a vacuum without that potential desire for use in the future. So back to Mr. Roth's point, the implementation of full-day kindergarten doesn't necessarily have to coincide with a redistricting or with a potential school closure. It could be just considered that it would actually be available to us in the future and estimated as part of the overall decision in the future, if that's what the board decides.
Just to make one point, and it's a short-term trend, not a long-term trend, but we have seen a demographic change with the English as second language learners in our school district. It has significantly increased the last few years. It may not be a long-term trend, but it is something that we need to be considering also on the aspect from an educational perspective besides the special education.
Before we open it up to comment, why don't we roll right into the special education, since those two are so tied together. That was a good suggestion from Paul. Just a little history. I first moved to Philadelphia in 1991 to go work with the world-leading doctors in autism down at CHOP. And I thought those people were some of the smartest people I ever met, and I thought they were going to figure it out. And it's gotten significantly worse. The reason I bring that up is, this special education trend, you got the most brilliant people in the world trying to figure this out, and they haven't improved it. It's actually gotten worse. So I think it's a growing trend. I think it's something we need to seriously look at as we work through all this.
I will add to that with, not only autism being, children with these kind of needs to these kind of needs. But, you know, you look at the ADHD. ADHD is through the roof, and most children with ADHD are right in there in the classroom, and in full knowledge, one of my children, ADHD, they're right there in the classroom, but they need space, you know, in their 504s to go take a test. So it's little things and big things that all add up. Anxiety sounds, you know, we've all read lately the increase in anxiety in children. And I'm not saying you can't redistrict because of that, but those are things you need time and space for. So that's kind of where we're going with the education is changing. And to the point, I think we all know rooms can be shared. When I did it, I was there on Mondays and Tuesdays, and the other person was there on Wednesdays and Thursdays, or I used it in the morning, the other person used it in the afternoon. So I also think there are ways to share rooms. It's what one of the members of the community mentioned about the simultaneous is not really plausible in giving most services.
Just real quick, I'll get back to the idea of, you know, we might not know exactly what the schools will look like, but I think it's important that we know the students we have now. You know, we might have students move into a district, or we might have a change of, you know, within the district. But I think it's important, you know, to get to Andrea's point, where if you can do the sharing of the rooms, you know, if we close the school, I think we need to have exactly knowing how many special needs students, you know, we think we'll have. You know, it can be a ballpark. You can be off by a couple, but I think it's important to see what that will look like. Because again, without seeing at least a approximation of that, it makes it very difficult to know what, you know, our district could look like minus one school.
I'd second that, so I don't know what that means from what we would need, but the sort of overlapping all of these is the capacity and the special education and the education requirements. We need to be not only transparent to the community, but for making the decision, understanding what it's going to be. And I respect Dr. Zerbe's defense of the administration. It was not an attack on the administration or the principals, but the idea that the principals will make it work. I'm sure they can make it work, but is that the preference? So we need to find a way to make sure we have that clearly defined, the before and after.
Okay, anybody in the public have a comment? Yeah, Andrew.
Andrew Sander again. I definitely appreciate all the conversation about looking at educational programming and special education needs, and I think really it does. I think that's the biggest part of, a lot of people talked about it, and you guys did too. It's student-teacher ratio, number one, and number two is what are our special needs. And I think it's really hard to say what they are, because like we talk about scheduling rooms, but that makes me a little nervous, because I know there's kids, because I do some watchdog dad stuff, that they need a place to go to like calm down. It doesn't matter if it's 4 in the afternoon or 9 in the morning. There's a certain place where they have to go. So the kid's not going to time his breakdown, quote unquote, on a schedule of a room. So you really have to look at what the needs are from a special education standpoint. I think that's really, really important.
Andrew, if I can ask, based on your experience then, is there always some available space where, for lack of a better term, they need a timeout?
Yeah, there's like a decompression room. They have that at Arrowhead. And so it might be one of the rooms that you walk by that you said, oh, that's an empty room. But that's because that room needs to be available for that child to be able to go to. And it's a very important room, trust me. And I think so for everybody to buy in, again, it comes to that, what Mr. Dornan said, we need to know what the buildings have now, what are we utilizing the rooms for now? And could they be scheduled, couldn't they be scheduled? And what is your preferred student-teacher ratio? And then everything kind of falls out of that. You know how many rooms you have, you multiply it by those numbers, and you get an answer. I just want to echo the importance of student-to-teacher ratio and really understanding the needs for the special education. And you guys have talked about the trends of going up. And again, I don't like to harp on it, but I really don't hear any teachers or anybody coming to any of these things or my time in the community saying, boy, our school's so empty. We really need to get a school closed. Because I think, maybe you said, I think it was said maybe it's a luxury, but I think a lot of they're utilizing it, the administrators are using it, the teachers are using it for important things that you didn't have 10 years ago that are identified, that we have legal obligations as well as personal ethical obligations to fulfill.
Thanks.
I'm Erica Sabinski. I have 2 kids at Audubon. One of them is a first grader, so she just went through the half-day kindergarten, and she would have loved a full-day kindergarten, and you were talking about how do we know how many more full-day kindergartners we would have had, and maybe it's a very simplistic way to look at it, but she had 3 classes in half-day kindergarten. There's 4 classes of first grade, so I'm sure it's a very simplistic way to look, but that's 20-some kids who probably went to kindergarten someplace else because it was full day, whether it was because their parents needed the childcare or they just wanted the full day. I would have loved the full day, but I was able to stay home with my daughter, so she went to half-day kindergarten so that she could go to the same school as her brother. My niece also goes to the half-day kindergarten at Audubon, but she goes over to the YMCA so that she can have a full-day experience because she can't be at home for the other half of the day. So some parents who can't afford to go to a private kindergarten have to find alternatives like the half-day at Audubon and then the half-day someplace else. So again, it's probably a simplistic way to look at it, but there's at least a
No, that's a good idea.
easy,
Thanks.
like right off the top of your head, how many kindergartners did we have? How many first grades do we have? That'll give you, a sort of starting point. And then to address the special needs, you brought up kids with anxiety. My son's one of those kids, and one of the services he gets, which I will tell everyone under the sun about it because I'm proud that he does it, is he gets mental health services through the school. He gets someone he can talk to, learn his coping mechanisms, his coping skills, how to chill out. I would love it if Audubon had a room empty for him to go chill out when the kids get in his face at recess and he needs someplace to calm down. I don't think they have a room like that, so if we could have the luxury of an empty room so he could chill out, that would be great. But he can't go talk to his counselor in a room that's also being used for speech therapy, for some other thing. Even if that room is being used for kids to take a test, those kids can't take their test. If their IEP says that they need a quiet room for a test, they can't do that in a shared space with a kid who's talking to his counselor, because I'm sure there's, lack of a better word, patient confidentiality issues, but also the kid who needs the quiet space needs the quiet space. So, it's echoing the same things we've said over and over, but the sharing space issues, for so many reasons, just might not work out. I live on the far side of Audubon, practically in Phoenixville, so if you redistrict, we'll probably stay at Audubon. It'd be silly for us to go the other side, so, we luck out. However,
That will be a quality check. We look to make sure you stay in Audubon.
Yeah.
Didn't make any glaring mistakes.
Yeah, we live 10 feet from the Phoenixville border, so, but it would be nice to see some more space for our kids. And one small analogy, we talked about capacity and how big, we've all gone to buy clothes. If you buy clothes that fit, as much of your body into it as you possibly can, they're not comfortable. You fit in them, and we've all seen people who wear clothes like that, and you go, yeah, it fits, but it's not great. So I don't think squeezing 25 kids into our classrooms is good for anybody. And the 22, that might work, but still, it's not comfy. So, and if we have 25, and then kids move into the district, into that class, we're now over our 25. So planning for 25 doesn't help anybody, at least not those teachers. I'm a Daisy Girl Scout leader, and we had 3 leaders and 12 girls, and that was a lot of kindergartners, 12 kindergartners and 3 parents. And so I don't know how the kindergartner teachers do it with one of them and 20-some. So wherever your kindergarten teacher is up there, I don't know how you do it, because 3 of us couldn't do it with 12 girls. We were dying. So anyway, that's way more than my 3 minutes, but thank you.
Thank you for sharing all that. We're getting a good education from all you folks, so appreciate you sharing this. And it reiterates the point of having this meeting before we start getting the data, because as a statistician, as soon as that M&M report's in front of my face, I'm going to be up to my eyeballs looking into that. So having these type of discussions ahead of time are really going to help us keep things in mind, so appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Janice Conger. I'm the librarian at Skyview. I'm also a Lower Providence resident. I live in Arrowhead, and my kids went all through Methacton School District as well. Currently at Skyview, I don't know if it's the 5th grade or the 6th grade, they are the first class where we did not have T1. You can tell the difference in the maturity of some of the students, and that they did not get as well prepared as the children that did have T1. If we go to a full-day kindergarten, that could alleviate some of this problem that we are seeing currently, in that the kids are not as mature as they, as they could be coming into 5th and 6th grade. A lot more is expected of them in 5th and 6th grade, and a lot of them are not up to the task. So please consider all-day kindergarten.
My son went through T1 and it worked out great for him. It was the perfect spot for him. So if we can cover off on some of that with a full-day kindergarten, we're all ahead.
Hi, I'm Julie Stern-Delfiner. We live in Lower Providence. My son's in 5th grade. I am also a pediatrician, and so I look at this both as a parent and as well as a physician. And I just want to say that even though I will no longer have a child who can go to full-day kindergarten, I think that the educational and emotional experience that provides is really invaluable. We actually had to pay for a full-day kindergarten program because it wasn't available here. When we bought 12 years ago, we really thought that by the time our son was in school, we would have that option. We would have never paid for private kindergarten if it had been available to us. We're expecting really young kids to meet milestones that they're maybe age not appropriate to do yet, and we're cramming that into 2.5 hours. So I just want to say that I add my very vocal support to adding that, as I think you'll not only see a great improvement in our children and their education, their emotional development, but I think you may also see an increased number of people looking to buy in the district because, people look at that as an available thing, and there are so many districts around us that offer full-day kindergarten now, some recently, some have been doing it for a long time, and people look at that, and people decide where they're going to buy, in part based on that. And so I just wanted to add my voice to that.
Thank you.
Jennifer Zavertnik, Lower Providence. I'm a school psychologist, and so Mrs. Conger did take one of my points about T1 being eliminated and the need for maybe full-day kindergarten helping to replace the needs of the students that are now coming up because of not having T1. But the other thing, I'm really glad that Kim brought up that this would be a perfect time for you guys to review the policy on student-teacher ratios. I think 22 for the younger kids is still a lot. I go into classrooms every single day, and I see classrooms of 24, 25, and I see classrooms of 18, 19. And the difference is night and day. And I think if you are just going to look at the dollar signs of, okay, if we reduce it to 18 or 19, that means we need another room, we need another teacher, and you just look at the finances of that and you say, oh, it's too costly to do that, I think it would behoove you to look at the bigger picture and say, okay, if we do that, what are the benefits that you have? And oodles and oodles of research will show you that lower student-to-teacher ratios gives higher student achievement. You get higher test scores. I know during the public hearings you heard teachers and kids say that they felt happier because they had more attention to them, more individual attention. Teachers are happier because there's less students in the classroom. But then higher test scores, you could have less referral to special education, to coming to the school psychologist for testing, for being identified, which means savings on your special ed end, which can be huge. So I would behoove you to look at that now and just not look at the immediate dollar signs of that means just more rooms and more teachers, and we can't afford that. So there is a bigger picture that may be more savings down the line.
Thank you. Anybody else?
John Andrews. I wanted to point out one thing on the first item that we discussed, namely the enrollment projections that I think is significant to the educational programming, and that is that about 20% of the kids, more or less, that live in Methacton go to private and parochial schools or homeschooling charter schools. And a year ago, the number of those kids across K to 12 was 620. This fall, it's 826. It's an increase of a third. And along with that, the total number of students in K to 12 across the Methacton schools and all the other schools is up almost 200 this year from last year. So that ought to put to rest that enrollment is going down, and therefore we're going to have extra rooms here or extra rooms there. With regard to the special education needs, there are lots of places around the country where they have half-size schoolrooms because the number of special ed kids in a room is restricted, and a room for 25 that you can only put 8 in if they're autistic, for instance, may not be a good use of facilities. So, that I think is a more important wrinkle on placement of students than the small issue of a few modulars. With regard to full-day kindergarten, I think that needs a lengthy discussion on its own. Just this evening we've heard a lot of people favoring that, but there are a fair number of instances of kids are being overburdened in kindergarten with math, and by the time they get to 4th grade, they're sick of math. So there are some things that the education system is pushing, perhaps in an unwise manner. In case in point, one of the Northern European countries, I don't know whether it's Finland or Sweden or Norway, but they start school at age 8, not at age 5. And they excel us by the time those kids graduate from 12th grade.
Can you finish up, please, John?
So, with regard to pre-K, I think there are lots of studies that show that pre-K is totally a babysitting service and an expensive one. And I think kindergarten probably is not just a place for babysitting for the parents that are out working, but we need to be very cautious as to the long-term benefit of kindergarten.
All right, thank you. Jim?
I'll keep it brief. With regards to the programmatic issues, special ed, this is going to affect your capacity the most of anything, because class size is directly related to capacity. So whatever you do to your class size, you'll do to your capacity. One of the board members gave you an example of saying, look, if we want it to be 18 and the building and the class is 50, we can do that. Well, if you do that, what you're going to do is take a class of 50 and waste all that capacity. So, and I'm not saying it's a waste of capacity for the programmatic issue. You're just going to have to realize that you're mandated by law for the special ed kids to restrict that class size to that many kids. If you go to full-day kindergarten, then you're going to mandate that class size for full-day kindergarten instead of a half-day. So you're going to basically cut your capacity in half for, I guess, those kindergarten students. So realize if you're going to go full-day kindergarten, your capacity is going to be affected. So you can't really look at it, I think somebody said, look at it in a vacuum. You can't look at it in a vacuum because your capacity is going to be impacted. But you can really look at it in a vacuum because you have so much extra capacity that I don't think it's really going to be affected.
We are going to, as I mentioned in the capacity study, they're going to look at it with and without full-day kindergarten, so we'll get some of the numbers that you're referring to there.
Right. But it's not going to really matter because you have so much extra capacity even if you look at it in a vacuum, if you redistrict, it's not going to matter. So because there's so much extra, it's not going to matter. Just realize this, that your current cost per pupil, the cost to educate one student at Methacton is $20,000. Okay? Now, if people aren't happy with the outcome of their educational situation at $20,000 per pupil, I have a problem with that. Okay? We're putting $20,000 of our tax money into the educational system for one pupil. Now, if the thought is, well, let's work with the student-teacher ratio. If you do that, you're also going to have problems with the capacity, because if you go to 19, you go to 18, you go to 16, you're going to chew up your capacity again, right?
Yeah, and for every $1,000, just to give a reference, for every $1,000 we change one way or the other, we're talking about close to a $5 million impact on the budget,
right,
given our size. I do know that other schools like Upper Marion's doing it for around $21,000. Lower Marion's doing it for about $29,000. But next door we also have North Penn, which has about 13,000 students. They might be getting some economies of scale over there. They're doing it for about 15, 16.
All right, we got to understand.
So we kind of got some numbers all over the place.
You mentioned Upper Marion, right? Upper Marion's got the King of Prussia Mall that's offsetting the revenue. Right? What was the other one you mentioned? Right, they have, right, whereas we have nobody. We have a local tax base of people living in houses like us. So you got to understand, $20,000 on the back of a bunch of senior citizens and taxpayers like us is a lot of money. So I think, the kids are getting a decent education here at Methacton. I really do. And if you start dropping class sizes, you're going to have to start dealing with these figures at $20,000 is a lot of money per pupil, comparatively, as you just mentioned. So, all right,
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Anybody else? In terms of the facilities assessment, Scott, do you have anything to say related to that we should be discussed?
No, I mean, we have the study. It's being made public. Obviously, two schools, Arrowhead and Audubon, are the biggest numbers as far as the elementary schools go. And depending on where we are with some of this gray area, we're going to have to decide, what's the best investment to make, whether we keep 5 schools and we invest roughly $26 million in the 2 schools to bring them up to date, which is roughly what the number is, or maybe we don't need 2 full schools and there's a case to be made about some other option, adding one to one school or doing something that allows us to maybe still close something. So I think, once again, I think we got to get the capacities and the enrollment piece correct, and then we have to decide what the best box to put around the enrollment will be. So, I in my previous life, you never defined the box before you understood what you were making in the box, right?
Anybody else have any comments? Yeah,
just real quick, I think to follow up what Scott said, I think we should have an open mind of all the buildings from a facility perspective. So the Farina building is 50-some years old, and it has a price tag in that capacity in the property study also. So, maybe there's you bulldoze that and you move the administration building into Skyview. I mean, I'm just throwing random ideas out there, but I'm just saying there's ways to save potentially also on some of those facilities.
Yep.
One thing that Scott said that I heard clearly was the possibility of adding on. So I know those kinds of decisions can't be made now, but I do think that when we're looking at this, if we could identify, if we did decide to close a school, if we could identify the best place to then possibly add on to if we needed it. Or just, I know we're talking about the present, but we do have to have a view for the future. So that was something that might have been thought of before, but wasn't verbalized before.
It's a good point. I mean, it's a good, we're in kind of a good place from that perspective that we have several elementary schools that have a decent amount of property to them. So if we need to add on at some point, we should be able to support that.
And just to tag on to that a little bit, it's interesting once the public gets a chance to see the facilities assessment report. We talked about the dollar amounts, how Audubon and Arrowhead tend to be the two highest, and 11.9, and I think it's like 12.7. They also do make a recommendation in there that if you were to basically just knock down the entire building and build a new building in the same size, that they're talking about like 14 million or 16 million. I mean, to a certain degree, sometimes you wonder, like, we have to keep every option open here. We're going to put $12 million to renovate a school which is 60 years old or something, or are you going to, is the smart move to knock it down and build another school when it's going to cost you only, $1 million or $2 million more, and then you have a brand new school in the district, which will last you. So I'm not saying that is the way we should go, but I think that's that open mind concept of we really need to keep every option open, I think, in this.
Time will tell, definitely. Anybody else? Any comment?
I just wanted to add on to what Mike was just saying, that in considering that option, we also then have the ability to, instead of building a new school that can house 500 students, maybe we build a new school that can house 550, 600, so that if we go from 5 schools to 4 and we build this new facility, all of this hypotheticals, but then it gives us that extra breathing room, that space to accommodate the what if, to accommodate the bubble class, to accommodate the unexpected special ed needs that we may have down the road. So I think that kind of outside the box thinking is the direction that we need to go. And I think the facilities assessment study is the one area that we have the room for the most creativity and the most brainstorming.
Any more comments? Anybody have comments out there? Facility assessment. Go ahead, John.
John Andrews. With regard to the facility study that the architect started a year ago, November, and gave us a report in April, here we are at the end of October, and the public still hasn't seen the report, and the superintendent says, well, you can come and look at it at the Farina lobby. There's got to be an electronic version of that thing, and I think it should be made available to the public. Maybe there's some reluctance to give the contractors the price estimate on putting on roof A, figuring that that's what they can bid and win. But the larger issue is treating the taxpayers fairly. And I'm not saying the school board is going to go for half of the $92 million of the hard costs or all of it. But in terms of non-electoral bond issues, all the money you can get, according to your financial consultant, is $42 million. If you go above that, you're talking about an electoral referendum bond issue, or a bond issue that is voted, I think, at a spring meeting, at a spring election, where all the voters go there either to vote for the governor or the presidential candidates or whatever. And with 3/4 of the voters here having no children in the schools, you need to tread very cautiously, transparently, and effectively to get their affirmative votes. So in my book, I should be able to look at an electronic copy of that document and the workbook.
All right, thank you. Jim?
I have to apologize because usually I'm well prepared, but I'm not well prepared for this. What's the price tag on this thing? On the facilities assessment study, total price tag?
100 million roughly.
100 million? Dollars?
Yes, dollar.
The cost of the study.
No, he was talking about the cost in the
Yeah,
study.
the cost of doing whatever, since I haven't seen this study, so I don't know what you plan on doing. I'm hearing somebody talking about a new school. Which new school you intend on building?
It's just a
I think they were
hypothetical.
just talking about...
No. I understand it's hypothetical. What hypothetical new school are you talking about?
I think, Jim, as we...
Well, see...
The board just wait. As the board considers the study and looks at some of the facilities, obviously, as I stated, Audubon and Arrowhead are the two most expensive. They're the two oldest schools in the asset group. If either or both decide to be kept, the question I think that we would have to deal with is what's the cost of a new elementary school versus the cost of that total money, and would that make an asset more valuable for a longer period of time than upgrading to older assets. So I think there's a lot of work we have to do as a board to decide what or how much of that roughly $100 million that we think need to be done. I don't think it's any secret to anybody here or within the district that we probably haven't spent the money on the infrastructure of our buildings the way we should to maintain it. I can tell you as a professional in that business that we haven't done that, and I've been to all the schools, and that's just where we are right now. So I think the board's got a lot to do, but it behooves us to make sure that as we're looking at enrollment, that we're also looking at the best way to update our facility assets to make sure that they've got the right, capabilities, whether it's from an infrastructure perspective or an athletic perspective or whatever it is, grounds, whatever you want to call it. We've got to look at that whole picture. I don't know what the answer is. My guess is the $100 million is not the answer because there's things in there that are what I would call nice to haves. So this is a study from the third party that did exactly what we asked. Give us an assessment that would give us roughly what we'd need to spend over a 10-year period to bring our facilities up to what the standard should be, whether that be code, capacity, infrastructure, life cycle kinds of things, roofs, all of that.
So
and so that's what we got. So now we've got to go through the exercise of analyzing that and making a determination of what and where we spend our money going forward.
So when you said we asked, was this at a public meeting you asked?
We asked what?
You said you asked them to do these things. At a public meeting you asked them?
Well, we had the study. The school district enlisted an architect to do the study so that we had information on our facility assets so that we could make sure we understood what the expenditure or requirements are and the expenditure.
Who set the parameters for this? The board or the superintendent?
All of it predated this board, but the parameters were set not by, at a high level, by the school district and the facilities group, but what we did was ask an architectural/engineering firm to come in and give us an assessment.
I know. When you said we asked, was it done at a public meeting or was
I
it done?
believe so. It was voted on. The cost was voted on at a meeting.
I understand the cost, but who set the parameters? Was it the superintendent?
We'd have to go back and look at that because
there was a scope written.
Because I don't remember.
That was before we all came
All
on the
right.
board.
See, because when I look at the buildings, just common sense wise, Woodland is a fairly new structure. Because we spent $10 to $15 million on it back when we built Skyview. So I can't imagine there's much to do on that new structure because it was built back in 2008, 2009. Right?
But this facilities report also looks 6 to 10 years into the future. So at that point, you're looking at parts of Woodland being 15 to 20 years old, and things will need to be updated and maintained.
You know,
in
I
that
can't imagine a huge cost for that. Worcester and Eagleville are still not that old a building. I can't imagine anything more than some roof work on either structure being a problem, just from common sense.
Hey, Jim, if you're okay with it, can we hold off
Okay.
on in-depth conversations about the buildings and the
all right, well,
split
let me-
when we get to that point?
Let me
where we're opening up the books?
comment. Let me make a comment. You're having a meeting tonight.
Yeah.
You want to discuss the facilities assessment study.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any reason it couldn't have been put on the website so we could have reviewed it and made intelligent public comment at the meeting?
After we approved it at the last regular board meeting, we offered it up to the public. Since we just approved it, the first approach to that is to make it available in Farina, which it has been since the last school board meeting.
So you think it's okay for us to have to go over to Farina and look at it over there? You couldn't have put it on the website to make it easier for us to look at?
Well, we'll look into
Dr. Zerbe, can I ask a question related to this? We did spend some money to get the electronic form of this, which was an Excel spreadsheet, but the original document did not come in an electronic form. It came in a hard copy. Is that correct? Do we have an electronic copy related to the full 1.5-inch document?
As it's been noted this evening and on past Tuesday, that the board accepted the facilities assessment study and the workbook. And I clearly indicated that we would make that information available. However, it's only been a day and a half or so, and we have other things that we're working on, and we will certainly make that available. It wasn't our intent to have that posted in advance of this particular meeting. So the particulars about the study, I don't believe were the content for our discussion, but understanding that the things that are inclusive in there may be in need of our consideration at some point in this process.
Yeah. I guess Dr. Zerbe was not directed.
So we will have an electronic version, and we will make the information available.
It was not an intent to keep the information away from anybody, talking about the logistics.
It's just a timing matter here.
Right. I'm just going to the gentleman in the audience's point about transparency. You know, it'd have been nice to have it so we could have looked at what the board is, contemplating $100 million. Do you know what I mean? I think with all that's going on, $100 million, in my opinion, is ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. That's all I have to say.
And just to jump in here real quick, this actually was talked about in both public meetings for the Property Committee and the Finance Committee and on screen, so people have had an opportunity to at least get a feel for the workbook, for the numbers, for the amounts per school. The exact details have not been released, but there has been the opportunity to view this at 2 different public committee meetings.
The last 2 items, I think we talked quite a little bit about, potential school closures. If we're reducing the schools, we'll be reducing by 1, who knows, maybe 2, I don't know, or we might keep them all. So we'll be looking at that, working on that as a board, as a community, to see where we need to go with that. As you can see, just on this meeting alone, there's a lot of different opinions, right? Some people think it's a no-brainer to close 1 or 2 schools, and they may be right. Other people are thinking we need all 5 schools, and they may be right. But that will be done in an open and transparent as possible manner so we can all understand the decisions. In terms of our timeline, our goal is to wrap up our decision by the beginning of the year, so in January. Is that correct, Dave?
The target for any decision, regardless of what that outcome is for January of 2017. That's accurate.
Yeah. Back in the spring, we mapped it out and we put a stake in the ground where we felt comfortable with. Obviously, as discussions and more information come available, we're going to try to hit that date, but that date might move a little bit, but that's our current target, and that's what we're working for. One way to look at it is here we are at the end of October and we're talking about January. Does it seem like we're rushing the process? We thought through the process in the spring. We identified the information we needed and when we could get it, and we set this timeline. So when we set this timeline, we felt comfortable with it. But obviously, if things need to change, then they will change. But everybody on this board is very committed to making a decision and moving forward, whatever that is. Any change creates anxiety, whether it's just simply redistricting the elementary schools because now you're moving kids to new buildings, or reducing a school because we have people that moved into our district for a specific elementary school and they grew up going to that school, and it's not an easy decision. And when my parents moved on the second day of kindergarten, I stood in my new kindergarten and cried all day. So it's a tough process no matter what. I thank you all for coming out tonight. We really appreciate your comments. You gave us a lot of things to think about, and we're going to continue to do this process in more of a town hall meeting to keep it away from, we're now in critical time periods for our regular board meetings, and we can't spend a lot of time in those meetings talking through this and everything. So we're going to take this process forward when we have long meetings where we need to really talk about a lot of detail. Okay?
Chris, if you don't mind, just in terms of the timeline, the one thing I do want to add, which I think is crucial to sticking to our January timeline, is, there's been a couple things mentioned tonight which require some work to be done. We have to hear from Dr. Katona about the full-day kindergarten, if that makes it in front of the Education Committee. I don't know if there's going to be a meeting scheduled in December, if that will make it for November. We're also talking about capacity. We need to see that, and I think part of our timeline and everything has to be that all of the data has to meet this timeline as well. So I think that we're shooting for January, but no one.
I totally support that.
Yeah. Thank you.
I apologize because I stepped out for a second, and we jumped to the timeline. I have a real quick question. And bear with me because I know we want things to move on, but if the decision in January is made, whatever those decisions are, could that decision be it's not for the next year, it's for the next year? Is that not even on the table? Just because of the severity of this.
Our goal is to make the best decision. So if in January we make a decision and we feel that that decision is going to take a long enough time period that we can't do it well in the beginning of the next school year, then we can't shove it in there. We can't jam it in. There's a lot of things. Even something as simple as redistricting. See the challenges we had with buses this year. We redistrict, we're going to have to spend a lot of time and thought into the bus schedule and all the other schedules just to make sure it goes smoothly, even if we keep all the buildings. So, we got to think through it and draw in the rest of the Methacton staff and the community to really build our confidence when we make a decision. Can we hit the next school year, or do we not have enough confidence to do that? Thank you, everybody.